My name's Morgan. I'm 32 years old, and I'm a single mother to the most amazing 6-year-old boy named Ethan. Right now, I am behind the wheel, driving away from my parents' house, my vision blurred by tears that won't stop falling. Ethan sits silently in the back seat, too young to understand the heartbreak I'm trying to hold in. Today was supposed to be a warm and joyful Thanksgiving, the kind filled with laughter, shared memories, and the comfort of family. But instead, I found myself thrown out of my childhood home, publicly humiliated, simply because my sister Amanda decided she didn't want me there. The worst part? I've been quietly paying my parents' bills for the last 5 years, and this, this is how they thank me. Before I dive deeper into the betrayal that shattered my heart, let me tell you what led us here. Growing up, I always believed we were a close family. My dad, Robert, my mom, Catherine, my younger sister, Amanda, and me. We lived in a quiet suburb in Connecticut where Sundays meant home cooked dinners and summer always ended with beach vacations. From the outside, we looked like the textbook American family, stable, loving, even enviable. But beneath the surface, there was a quiet imbalance, a subtle favoritism that I didn't have words for until I got older. Amanda was born when I was 4. I was over the moon to become a big sister. I still remember walking into the hospital proudly clutching a little stuffed bunny I had saved my allowance for weeks to buy. I couldn't wait to meet her. In the photos from that day, you can see the pure joy in my eyes as I held her tiny body in my arms. I adored her from the start. But as we both grew, I began to notice how differently we were treated. If Amanda cried, my parents would rush to soothe her. If I cried, they'd tell me to be a big girl. When she struggled in school, they hired tutors, met with her teachers, and adjusted their expectations. When I excelled, straight A's, perfect attendance, awards, it was just typical Morgan, as my mom would say to her friends. She's the responsible one. At first, I took pride in that. I wanted to be dependable. I worked hard in school, joined every club I could, helped around the house without being asked. Meanwhile, Amanda quickly learned how to manipulate situations to her advantage. If something broke, she'd blame me. If she wanted something, she'd cry until she got it. She would stir up drama from nothing. And our parents always gave her the benefit of the doubt. Your sister's just more sensitive, they'd say. She needs a little more attention. By high school, the pattern was impossible to ignore. I was editor of the school paper, captain of the debate team, and already being scouted for college scholarships. Amanda, on the other hand, was popular but reckless, skipping class, sneaking out, getting caught drinking. Every time she crossed a line, my parents would shrug it off. She's just going through a phase, they'd say. Let her figure things out. After high school, I earned a partial scholarship to a state university and double majored in finance and business. I worked part-time jobs to cover what my scholarship didn't. Amanda, who barely scraped through graduation 2 years later, enrolled in a community college, entirely paid for by our parents. In my junior year of college, I met Jason. He was charming, ambitious, and seemed genuinely interested in who I was, not just what I could offer. We dated for almost 2 years and married shortly after I graduated. I was only 22, maybe a little naive, but I was in love and optimistic about our future. I landed a great job at a respected financial firm. Jason worked in marketing. We bought a modest starter home and started planning for the life we wanted to build. When I found out I was pregnant with Ethan a year later, we were thrilled. I imagined the perfect life, a loving home, a thriving career, a beautiful family. But that dream unraveled quickly. 7 months into my pregnancy, I found out Jason was having an affair with a coworker. I was devastated. We tried counseling, but the damage was too deep. By the time Ethan was 3 months old, our marriage was over. I was thrust into single motherhood, navigating a demanding job while raising a newborn alone. Those early years were the hardest I've ever endured. I'd work all day, pick up Ethan from daycare, then spend my nights rocking him to sleep while answering emails and trying to stay afloat. My weekends were a blur of laundry, cooking, cleaning, and desperately trying to create a sense of normalcy for my son. My parents helped occasionally, watching Ethan here and there, but more often than not, they were too busy, usually dealing with some new crisis Amanda had created. By that point, she had dropped out of community college, cycled through minimum wage jobs, and had a revolving door of boyfriends she'd live with temporarily before ending up back at our parents' home, unemployed and depressed again. Still, I pushed forward. When Ethan turned 3, I had already been promoted twice. I was finally making enough to breathe, enough to buy a better home in a neighborhood with excellent schools, enough to feel like I could give my son the life he deserved. And 5 years ago, my father had a heart attack. It wasn't major, but it forced us to confront some hard truths. While helping manage his recovery, I discovered that my parents were drowning in debt. Years of financially supporting Amanda, coupled with bad financial decisions and my father's inability to work as much, had left them on the brink of foreclosure. Without hesitation, I stepped in, paid off their most urgent debts, took over their mortgage payments, and began covering their monthly utility bills. I even added them to my health insurance plan as dependents. When their car broke down, I co signed a new one. When their roof started leaking, I paid for the repairs. Over the last 5 years, I've spent more than $120,000, 0 cents, supporting them. Meanwhile, Amanda's life remained a chaotic mess. She'd get a new boyfriend, move in, find a job, seem stable, then it would all come crashing down. She'd return to our parents' house, jobless and heartbroken. She spiraled into substance abuse, alcohol, prescription pills, and bounced in and out of rehab. And every single time, it was my money funding her recovery. Through it all. Mhm. I continued to stay in touch with my parents, mostly for Ethan's benefit. I wanted him to know his grandparents, to have that unique relationship that every child deserves, to grow up feeling part of a bigger, loving family. Every other Sunday, we'd head over to their house for dinner. Those visits were always a mixed bag. I'd endure my mother's veiled critiques of my parenting choices, my father's unfiltered political opinions, and Amanda's latest personal soap opera when she actually bothered to attend. "You're so lucky, Morgan," my mom would say, often with a tinge of bitterness. "Everything just seems to fall into place for you." I'd force a smile, biting back the words swirling in my head. Did she think luck was behind the 60-hour work weeks I pulled off, the nights I lay awake, drained to my core, crying silently from the sheer weight of keeping everything together, being both mother and father to Ethan while climbing the ladder in my career? Nothing I had came from luck. Every inch of stability I had built was the result of relentless effort, sleepless nights, and an iron will. But still, I told myself, family is family. And so I kept showing up, kept helping, kept hoping that maybe, just maybe, we'd one day become the close knit, supportive family I'd always yearned for. That hope survived until this Thanksgiving. This year, for once, I had genuinely been looking forward to the holiday. Ethan was old enough now to appreciate traditions and create meaningful memories. I had made plans to host Thanksgiving dinner at our home, something I had never done before. I wanted to begin new traditions to make our place the heart of family gatherings moving forward. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, I called my parents with excitement, ready to invite them over. "Actually, honey," my mother said, her voice overly cheerful, "we were thinking of hosting it this year. Your dad's been feeling much better, and we'd like to do it like we used to." I felt the sting of disappointment, but I didn't protest. "Sure, Mom, that sounds lovely," I said. "Should I bring anything?" "Touched yourselves," she replied. "Oh, and maybe your cranberry sauce. Everyone adores that." The week before Thanksgiving, I went into full preparation mode. I took Ethan shopping for new clothes, a crisp button-up shirt and little khaki pants for him, and a soft burgundy sweater dress for me. We bought thoughtful presents for everyone, a nice bottle of whiskey for my dad, a cozy cashmere scarf for mom, and even a gift card to Amanda's favorite boutique, though I wasn't sure she'd show up. I spent an entire evening making cranberry sauce from scratch, using my grandmother's recipe, rich with orange zest and a warm dash of cinnamon. Ethan helped, standing on his little step stool at the kitchen counter, his tiny hands carefully measuring sugar and spices while wearing the apron I had specially bought for him. "Is Aunt Amanda coming?" he asked innocently as we stirred the pot of simmering berries. His question gave me pause. Amanda had missed the last few family events, always canceling last minute with some vague excuse. "I'm not sure, buddy," I replied, "but Grandma and Grandpa will be there, definitely." 3 days before Thanksgiving, my phone rang. It was my mom. Her voice had that artificially casual tone I'd come to recognize over the years. It always meant something was off. "Morgan, sweetie, I was just wondering, is it really necessary for you to come on Thursday?" Nellie dropped my phone. "What? Mom, it's Thanksgiving." "Oh, yes, yes, of course," she stammered. "It's just, well, you're always so busy and the drive must be exhausting." "But Mom, it's only 40 minutes and I've already taken both Thursday and Friday off work," I said, increasingly confused. "Is something wrong?" "No, no, not at all," she rushed to assure me. "Just checking. We'll see you at 2 then." After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone. What was that about? For a fleeting second, I wondered if they were planning some kind of surprise for me, but considering our history, that seemed unlikely. 2 days before Thanksgiving, I called my dad just to confirm. "Hey, Dad, we're still good for 2 o'clock on Thursday, right?" There was a pause. "Yes, that's right," he said. Then, more hesitantly, "Listen, Morgan, there's something you should know. Amanda's back home. She's going through a rough patch." My heart sank. Here we go again. "What happened now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "She and her boyfriend, Craig, they broke up. It wasn't pretty. She's moved back in with us for now." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, Amanda was still my sister. "Is there anything I can do?" "No, no," he said quickly. "Just try to be patient with her, all right? Your mom's just worried. There might be some tension." "Dad," I said firmly, "I always try with Amanda. I'm not the one who starts things." "I know, sweetheart," he sighed. "It's just a sensitive time." The day before Thanksgiving, I received another message, this time a text from my mom. "Morgan, would you mind coming at 3 instead of 2? Need a bit more prep time." My suspicions were starting to take root. Still, I replied politely, "Sure, Mom, no problem." That afternoon, I met my friend Rachel for coffee. I showed her the text. Her eyebrows immediately pulled into a frown. "That's weird," she said, "especially after she already asked if you needed to come at all." "Maybe it's money again," I suggested, a familiar knot forming in my stomach. "My dad still hasn't deposited the check I sent for the property taxes." Rachel gave me a long, knowing look. "Morgan, you're too good to them, especially with how they always take Amanda's side." I shrugged. Rachel had seen my family dynamic unfold over the years and had plenty of opinions. "They're my family," I mumbled, my usual tired defense. "Family goes both ways," she said gently. "Just don't let them walk all over you." Thanksgiving morning arrived, bright and chilly. Ethan burst into my room, bouncing on the bed, his face lit up with joy. "Mom, Mom, it's Turkey Day." I laughed, pulling him close. "Yes, it is, buddy. Happy Thanksgiving." We spent the morning in pajamas, sipping hot cocoa and watching the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade on TV. The house smelled of cinnamon and nutmeg thanks to the pumpkin pies I'd baked the night before. Around noon, we started getting dressed. "Do you think Grandma made her special dinner rolls?" Ethan asked, looking up at me as I buttoned his shirt. "I bet she did," I said, smiling, even though deep down, something didn't feel quite right. I smiled to myself, remembering how Ethan had devoured 3 of Grandma's homemade dinner rolls last Christmas, his little face glowing with joy. And will Uncle Thomas and Aunt Lily be there too? He asked, his voice filled with hopeful curiosity. He was referring to my dad's brother and his wife, who sometimes joined us for the holidays. Maybe, I said, keeping my tone light. We'll find out when we get there. As I stood in front of the mirror applying my makeup, I tried to shake off the gnawing sense of unease that had been building all week. It's just a Thanksgiving dinner, I told myself, silently rehearsing the line like a mantra. Whatever's going on with Amanda, it's just one afternoon. I can manage it. Determined to keep the day positive, I focused on Ethan's excitement. He carefully carried the cranberry sauce to the car, cradling it in both hands like a precious treasure, while I followed behind with the pumpkin pies and a bag full of thoughtfully wrapped gifts. His face radiated pure, innocent joy, the kind of joy only children can truly embody. Seeing that, I made a promise to myself. No matter what the day held, I would not let anyone ruin this holiday for my son. Ready for Thanksgiving, buddy? I asked as I buckled him into his booster seat. Ready, he exclaimed, flashing a big thumbs up. I had no idea what was about to unfold, but whatever it was, I would face it with composure for Ethan's sake. When we arrived at my parents' house right at 3:00 p.m., the first thing I noticed was the number of cars lining the street. Several unfamiliar vehicles were parked out front, and it immediately struck me as odd. My mother hadn't mentioned inviting extended family or any friends. Look, Ethan, I said, pointing to a blue sedan parked near the curb. That looks like Uncle Thomas and Aunt Lily's car. They did come after all. Ethan's face lit up like a Christmas tree. He adored my uncle, who always brought fun little toys and knew exactly how to keep up with a 6-year-old's boundless energy. Arms full of food and gifts, we made our way to the front porch. Before I could even knock, the door swung open. My father stood in the doorway, wearing the forest green sweater I'd given him the previous Christmas. His expression was tight, his smile more of a formality than a greeting. Morgan, Ethan, he said with forced warmth, come in, come in. The smell that greeted us was familiar and comforting. Roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and the unmistakable aroma of my mother's buttery dinner rolls. But the air felt different. The usual warmth, the welcoming ease was missing. Instead, there was a subtle tension, a stiffness I couldn't quite place. Where should I put this, Grandpa? Ethan asked sweetly, holding up the bowl of cranberry sauce. My father gently tousled his hair and replied, in the kitchen, buddy. Grandma's in there. As Ethan dashed off toward the kitchen, I turned to my dad, lowering my voice. Is everything all right, Dad? You seem tense. Before he could answer, my mother appeared, drawing her hands on her apron. She gave me a brief, nervous hug and said, Morgan, you're right on time. Dinner's nearly ready. Her eyes didn't meet mine. They flicked past me, scanning the room behind me as though searching for a distraction. I could hear voices and laughter coming from the living room, far more than I'd expected. Something wasn't adding up. Who else is here? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Oh, just family, she replied vaguely. Thomas and Lily, cousin Patricia and her husband, your Aunt Sarah. Before she could finish, Ethan returned, looking confused. I was about to ask what was wrong when a sharp voice sliced through the hallway like a knife. What is she doing here? Ugh. She stood at the edge of the living room, arms crossed tightly across her chest, eyes locked on me with pure hostility. Her hair was dyed jet black with purple tips, and she'd clearly lost weight since I'd last seen her, but the scowl on her face, that icy glare, was all too familiar. My mother's hand fluttered nervously to her chest. Amanda, please. It's Thanksgiving. You told me she wasn't coming, Amanda said, pointing at me like I was some sort of trespasser. You promised. It felt like I had been slapped. I turned to my parents in disbelief. What is she talking about? My father stepped forward, palms up, trying to calm the situation. Now, girls, let's not do this here. Everyone's waiting to eat. I'm not sitting at the same table as her, Amanda announced dramatically. Not after what she did. I stared at her, dumbfounded. What are you even talking about? I haven't seen you in months. Don't play innocent, she snapped, her voice full of venom. It's what you always do. Act like you're so perfect while making my life hell. By now, Ethan had slipped back to my side, his small hand clinging tightly to mine. I could feel him shaking slightly. My heart ached. Mom, I said, my voice tight, what's going on? Why is Amanda acting like this? My mother glanced at the floor, then at my father, and finally at me. Morgan, maybe this just isn't a good day. I froze, the words settling over me like a cold, suffocating blanket. Are you asking us to leave? From the living room, I heard chairs scraping and voices murmuring. Then Uncle Thomas appeared behind Amanda, concern etched across his face. Everything all right out here? He asked cautiously. No, Amanda snapped. They invited her, after telling me she wouldn't be here. Thomas looked puzzled. Morgan's always been part of family dinners. Not anymore, Amanda shouted. Not after what she's done. I stared at her, my confusion now turning to anger. What exactly do you think I— Amanda's eyes narrowed into slits. You know what? You've always tried to make me look bad. Telling everyone I'm irresponsible, that I'm a burden, lying about me. I was stunned. I had never said anything cruel about Amanda to our family, not once. Maybe I'd vented to Rachel over coffee, but that was it. That's not true, I said calmly but firmly. I've never said anything about you to anyone. Liar! She screamed, causing Ethan to squeeze my hand tighter. Everyone's treating me differently. They look at me like I'm trash. And it all started after you had lunch with Aunt Sarah. I blinked, trying to remember. Yes, I'd had lunch with Sarah. A pleasant catch-up over salads where we mostly talked about Ethan's school and my job. Amanda had barely come up. Aunt Sarah herself stepped into view now, standing behind Uncle Thomas. Amanda, sweetheart. Morgan didn't say anything bad about you. We were just worried about— She's turned you all against me, Amanda yelled, her voice cracking. My mother quickly stepped between us, her voice low and desperate. Please, let's not do this today. Then, in a moment I will never forget, she turned to me and said, so quietly, I almost didn't hear it, Morgan, maybe it would be better if you and Ethan came another time. Amanda needs us right now, my mother said, as if that somehow justified everything. Her words landed like a punch to the gut. Mom, you can't be serious. My voice came out hoarse, barely audible. You're really asking us to leave on Thanksgiving? My father cleared his throat uncomfortably, not meeting my eyes. Just this once, Morgan. Amanda's going through a really rough time. Her doctor said stress might trigger another episode. Another episode? I echoed, confused and alarmed. What are you talking about? She doesn't need to know my business, Amanda snapped, cutting in before either of our parents could respond. Just get her out of here. I felt Ethan tug on my hand. Mom, he whispered, looking up at me with wide, anxious eyes. Why is Aunt Amanda so mad? Why is everyone yelling? That simple, heartbreaking question for my son nearly broke me. This day was supposed to be special. A chance to create good memories, to share warmth, to laugh over dinner rolls and pie. Instead, it had turned into something ugly, something cruel. I don't understand, I said, staring at my parents, my voice trembling. You invited us. We brought food. Ethan's been looking forward to this for weeks. I know, sweetheart, my mother replied, still refusing to meet my gaze. But family has to come first. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the irony was unbearable. I am family, Mom. We are family. My father moved closer, wrapping an arm around my mother as if shielding her from the confrontation. Of course you are, he said gently. But Amanda, she needs special care right now. You understand. You've always been the strong one. From the living room, I heard Cousin Patricia call out cheerfully, Is dinner ready? The kids are getting hungry. My mother's voice shifted into that bright, artificial tone she used when pretending everything was fine. Just a few more minutes, she called back, then lowered her voice again as she turned to me. We can pack up some food for you to take home. Mm. I stood there, stunned, clutching Ethan's hand while trying to process what was happening. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was betrayal. This was abandonment. You're really doing this, I said, my voice flat. You're kicking us out because Amanda threw a tantrum. My father shifted uncomfortably. It's not like that, he said weakly. It's just for today. You're not welcome at our Thanksgiving, Amanda interjected, her words loud and final. So take your brat and go. And that was it. That one word shattered whatever restraint I had left. You can say whatever you want about me, I said, my voice low and trembling with fury, but you do not speak to my son that way. Ethan is your nephew. He's 6 years old. He has done nothing to deserve this. Amanda rolled her eyes with exaggerated indifference. Whatever, just leave. I turned to my parents, desperate for them to say something, anything, to defend us. But instead, my mother said quietly, I'll wrap up some turkey and potatoes for you. And please take your pies, she added, as if offering a gesture of goodwill. We have plenty of dessert. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. The years I'd spent making excuses for them, telling myself that family meant forgiveness, loyalty, love, all of it dissolved. I saw them, really saw them for what they were. This wasn't family. This was conditional tolerance, a hierarchy. And we had just been voted off the island. No need, I said coldly. Keep the food, keep the gifts, keep everything. I looked down at Ethan. His eyes were brimming with tears. Come on, buddy. We're going to have our own Thanksgiving. But Mom, he whispered, his voice cracking, what about Grandma's rolls? At that, my mother flinched, visibly shaken, but she said nothing. We'll make our own rolls, I told him gently. Better ones. As we turned to go, Amanda stood in the hallway smirking. Victorious. My parents just looked away. Not one of them moved to stop us. Only Uncle Thomas stepped forward. Morgan, wait. But I raised a hand to stop him. Enjoy your dinner, I said calmly, my voice even, despite the lump in my throat. Don't worry about us. We'll be fine. I guided Ethan out the front door, leaving behind the cranberry sauce, the pies, the carefully wrapped gifts, and the last remnants of any illusion I had about what kind of family I was part of. The first few minutes in the car were silent, broken only by Ethan's soft sniffles in the back seat. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles pale against the leather, focusing on the road ahead instead of the tears forming in my eyes. After a long pause, Ethan's small voice broke the silence. Mom, why were Grandma and Grandpa mean to us? I glanced at his reflection in the rearview mirror, my heart aching at his confusion. How do you explain toxic family dynamics to a 6-year-old? They weren't being nice today, I said gently. Sometimes grown-ups make bad decisions. But it's Thanksgiving, he insisted, his brows furrowed in frustration. We're supposed to be together on Thanksgiving. That's what you always say. I know, sweetheart, I said, my voice thick. That's how it should be. Did I do something wrong? He asked quietly. Is that why they didn't want us there? That question was like a knife. No, Ethan, I said firmly. You did absolutely nothing wrong. This isn't about you. And then why? He whispered. I couldn't drive anymore. My vision blurred, my hands trembling. I pulled into the small park near our house, the one with the little wooden playground and the duck pond we used to visit when Ethan was a toddler. Parking the car, I turned around to face him. Sometimes family is complicated, I said, choosing my words carefully. Aunt Amanda is upset, and Grandma and Grandpa are trying to help her. But they made a mistake by asking us to leave. Ethan nodded slowly, trying to understand. Aunt Amanda was really mad. Yes, I said, she was. She called me a brat. His lower lip trembled, and I unbuckled my seatbelt, reaching into the back seat to take his hand. That was very wrong of her. You are not a brat, Ethan. You are a kind, brilliant, wonderful boy. Anyone would be lucky to spend Thanksgiving with you. He nodded again, still a little unsure. Can we still have turkey? Despite everything, I smiled. Absolutely. We'll have our own special Thanksgiving dinner. As Ethan turned to gaze out the window at the empty playground, I pulled out my phone. 5 missed calls. 3 from my mother, 1 from my father, 1 from Uncle Thomas. Several text messages had arrived, too. Morgan, please understand, Amanda needs us right now. Mom again. Call me when you get home safely. Dad, don't be upset. We'll make it up to you. Uncle Thomas. What happened was wrong. Call me later. I stared at the screen for a moment, then placed the phone face down on the seat beside me. I wasn't ready to reply. Instead, I turned back to my son. Come on, Ethan, I said, reaching for his hand again. Let's go make some rolls. I opened my banking app, casually at first, intending only to distract myself. But as I scrolled through the familiar sea of transactions, months and months of automatic payments to my parents' mortgage company, utility providers, their insurance carrier, a slow burn of resentment began to rise in my chest. 5 years. That's how long I had been shouldering their bills, sending over $2,000, 0 cents, every single month. And for what? Images flashed in my mind, memories layered with sacrifice. That Christmas during the early years of being a single mom, when I'd skipped buying myself a coat just to afford a weekend trip to New York so they could see the Nutcracker at Lincoln Center. The anniversary dinner I had planned for my father's 60th, complete with a reservation at their favorite steakhouse, down to the wine I knew they liked. All the birthdays, holidays, and simple Tuesdays when I chose their needs over my own. And now, tossed aside, the moment Amanda cried, loud enough, I thought back to the night I first offered to help with the mortgage, right after Dad's heart attack. My mom had wrapped me in a hug, eyes wet with tears. We don't know what we'd do without you, Morgan, she'd whispered. You've always been our rock. Rock, their anchor, their daughter, their personal ATM. My phone buzzed again. A text from my mother. I packed a plate for you and Ethan. Your father can drop it off later. The absurdity of it nearly made me laugh. Kicked out of Thanksgiving dinner, yet offered leftovers like a consolation prize. As if a plate of turkey could fix what had just been broken. In the back seat, Ethan had unbuckled himself and was now quietly watching a squirrel dart around the park. His resilience always amazed me. How he could shift from heartbreak to curiosity so quickly. He was finding something to enjoy, even in this moment. Then my phone rang again. Not my parents this time, but Aunt Sarah. After a second's hesitation, I answered. Morgan, are you okay? She asked, her voice soft with concern. Not really, I admitted. Did they tell you what happened? I saw everything, she said grimly. It was awful how they treated you and Ethan. I tried to speak up after you left, but Amanda started crying again, and everyone just got pulled into that. What is she even talking about? I asked, frustration creeping in. I haven't said anything bad about her to anyone. Sarah let out a heavy sigh. It's all in her head, honey. She's been telling people you've been spreading lies about her, trying to turn the family against her. Nobody with half a brain believes it, but your parents, they're walking on eggshells around her. Why would she make that up? Jealousy, deflection, who knows? Sarah replied. She needs help, Morgan, real help. And your parents aren't doing her any favors by feeding into her delusions. Just then, my phone buzzed again. A banking notification. Unusual withdrawal alert. $5,000, 0 cents from checking account. My stomach dropped. Sarah, I need to go, I said abruptly. Something's wrong with my bank account. After we hung up, I frantically opened the app again and checked the transaction history. There it was, a $5,000 0 cents withdrawal that morning from the emergency joint account I had set up for my parents. It was the largest single amount they had ever taken. With shaking hands, I texted my father, "Why did you withdraw $5,000, 0 cents today?" His reply came quickly, "Emergency, we'll explain later." Then another message, this time from my mother. "Amanda needed help with some debts. We'll pay you back soon." The pieces fell into place like a sick puzzle. On the very day they humiliated me and Ethan, they had also emptied my account without permission to clean up Amanda's mess. And the worst part, I realized Amanda probably didn't even know I was the one funding everything. For all these years, my parents had been using my money while letting her believe they were financially responsible. The betrayal wasn't just today's rejection, it was the years of manipulation, of being used and ignored, of enduring subtle criticism while being the one who always came through. Another buzz, another text. Are you bringing Ethan to the Christmas pageant next week? He has that solo, right? As if nothing had happened, as if the afternoon's events could be swept under the rug and everything would continue like before. That message broke something in me. I called softly to Ethan, ready to go home and start our own Thanksgiving. He turned away from the window and nodded, climbing back into his seat. "Can we still have pie?" he asked hopefully. I smiled for real this time. "We'll get the best pie, and ice cream too." As I started the engine, something shifted inside me. A wall went up. Not out of anger, but out of necessity. I had allowed unlimited access to my time, my heart, my resources for far too long. That would never happen again. Strangely, the realization didn't hurt as much as I expected it to. By the time we pulled into our driveway, it was almost 4:30 p.m., prime Thanksgiving dinner hour. Our home felt quiet, peaceful, even in stark contrast to the chaos we had just left. Ethan kicked off his shoes and looked up at me expectantly. "What are we going to eat, Mom?" I set down my purse, took a deep breath, and smiled. "Let's see what we've got, buddy." A quick search through the fridge revealed slim pickings. I hadn't done much shopping, assuming we'd be eating leftovers all weekend. We had a few eggs, some shredded cheese, half a loaf of bread, and basic staples. "How about breakfast for dinner?" I offered. "Chocolate chip pancakes?" Ethan's eyes lit up. "Can we have bacon too?" I peeked into the freezer. No bacon, but tell you what, let's make a store run. We'll grab some real Thanksgiving food just for us. "Will anything still be open?" "The supermarket on Main Street's open until 6, I said with a wink. "We've got time." "I guess we're having an adventure," I said, grabbing my keys again. Ethan gave me a small smile and followed quietly as we got back into the car. The drive to the store was unusually quiet. Ethan, still processing everything, looked out the window, lost in thought. I used the silence to think through everything that had happened. My phone buzzed again and again in the cup holder. Messages from my parents, undoubtedly, but I had silenced it. I needed space. And more than that, I needed clarity. When we pulled into the supermarket parking lot, the scene was calm, even desolate. Only a few cars dotted the lot, likely other families making last-minute dashes after forgotten ingredients or changed plans. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly over a nearly empty store. Only two bored-looking cashiers stood at the front. "Let's see what they have left," I said, grabbing a cart. Ethan trailed beside me, still unusually quiet. Our first stop was the deli section. Miraculously, several rotisserie chickens still sat under the heat lamps. "It's not turkey," I told Ethan, lifting the biggest one into our cart. "But it's close." We made our way through the store, gathering whatever we could find. Instant mashed potatoes, powdered gravy, a bag of dinner rolls, a can of cranberry sauce. Not homemade, but it would do. In the freezer section, we grabbed a frozen pumpkin pie, and from the produce aisle, I picked up a solitary bag of green beans. "Real Thanksgiving dinners have green veggies," I explained when Ethan gave me a skeptical look. As we stood debating ice cream flavors to go with the pie, vanilla or caramel swirl, a woman about my age approached us, pushing a cart that mirrored mine. A rotisserie chicken, sides, and a few Thanksgiving essentials. "Back of dinner?" she asked with a knowing smile. "Something like that," I replied, managing a chuckle. "Plans fell through." "Same here," she said. "My sister's kids all came down with a stomach bug this morning, so the whole thing was canceled." She extended her hand. "I'm Sophie." "Morgan," I said, shaking it. "And this is my son, Ethan." Sophie crouched slightly to Ethan's level and smiled warmly. "How old are you, Ethan?" "I'm 6, he declared, holding up 6 fingers proudly, some of his earlier spark returning. "My nephew's 6 too," Sophie replied. "He was really looking forward to playing with his cousins today." As we chatted by the frozen foods, I found myself relaxing in Sophie's presence. She had a no-nonsense kindness to her, the kind you don't expect from a stranger. When she mentioned she lived just a few blocks from us, something about the timing felt meant to be. "This might sound odd," Sophie said as we headed toward checkout, "but would you two like to join me for dinner? I've got way too much food for just myself, and it seems silly to eat alone when we're clearly in the same boat." We hesitated, glancing at Ethan. "That's very kind of you," I said, "but we wouldn't want to impose." "It's not an imposition," she said quickly. "Actually, you'd be doing me a favor. Thanksgiving alone is kind of a bummer." Ethan tugged at my sleeve, looking up at me with wide, hopeful eyes. "Can we, Mom? Please?" I looked into his pleading face, and in that moment, the decision was simple. "If you're sure, we'd love to." We followed Sophie to her house after checking out. As I loaded the bags into the car, I realized my chest felt lighter than it had all day. Sometimes kindness really does come from the most unexpected places. Sophie's home was a cozy craftsman-style bungalow with a cheerful red door. Inside, it was warm and welcoming. Not spotless, but lived in, with stacks of books, mismatched pillows, and colorful paintings adorning the walls. "Make yourselves at home," she said, ushering us into the kitchen. "I'm not a gourmet or anything, but I can handle a rotisserie chicken." As we worked together to throw together our impromptu meal, I learned that Sophie was a pediatric nurse who had recently moved back to town after a divorce. She was easy to talk to, full of gentle humor, and didn't press when I gave vague answers about what had brought us to her doorstep. Ethan chattered freely as he helped arrange the rolls in a basket, his earlier heartache replaced by a quiet joy. By the time we sat down to eat, Ethan had completely forgotten the drama of earlier. Sophie carved the chicken, I mixed the potatoes, and we all took our seats at her little dining table, which she decorated with candles and mismatched plates. "Should we say what we're thankful for?" Sophie asked as we dug in. "I'll go first," Ethan shouted. "I'm thankful for chicken that tastes like turkey and new friends and ice cream." Sophie and I laughed. "I'm thankful for unexpected guests who make the holiday feel special," she said. When it was my turn, I felt emotion rise in my chest. I'm thankful for kind strangers and new beginnings. We shared that meal with genuine warmth. My phone continued to vibrate in my purse throughout dinner, but I ignored it. Nothing mattered in that moment except being present. Later, as Ethan lay on the couch watching a holiday movie, I finally checked my phone. 23 unread messages, 11 missed calls. Most were from my parents. Others from Amanda, Uncle Thomas, and Aunt Sarah. The latest was from my mother. Morgan, please respond. We're worried about you. I stepped out onto Sophie's back porch to make a private call. My fingers shook as I dialed Rachel. Oh my God, Morgan, she answered immediately. Where have you been? I've been trying to reach you all day. Sorry. I turned my phone off for a bit. It's been a day. Your mom called me, she said. She said there was some misunderstanding at dinner. What the hell happened? I gave her the short version, my voice trembling, the words still raw. I told her everything, the accusations, the $5,000 0 cents withdrawal, being cast out like we were nothing. They kicked you out and stole your money? Rachel's voice was thick with fury. Morgan, this has to stop. They're using you. I know, I said quietly. I think I've always known. But today, it made everything clear. So what are you going to do? I looked up at the sky. Stars were beginning to blink into view, silent and steady. I don't know yet, I whispered, but something's going to change. After we hung up, I sent a message to my mother. Ethan and I are safe. We'll contact you tomorrow. Then I opened my laptop and began drafting an email. In it, I detailed, with calm clarity, everything I had done for them over the years. The financial support, the sacrifices, the disappointment, the betrayal. I didn't send it. Not yet. It needed editing, but writing it helped organize my thoughts and affirm what I already knew. I was done being their rock, their scapegoat, their silence. Back inside, the smell of pie and rotisserie chicken lingered, and for the first time in years, I felt like I'd spent Thanksgiving where I truly belonged, in a home where kindness lived, even if it wasn't the one I came from. I found Sophie tidying up the kitchen while Ethan, full of food and joy, had dozed off on her living room couch, wrapped in a fleece blanket. Crashed hard, she said with a smile, glancing fondly at the sleeping boy. Too much excitement and pie. Thank you again, I said, sincerely, feeling a swell of gratitude rise in my chest. You really saved our Thanksgiving. Sophie smiled. Mutual rescue. I was staring down a lonely holiday before you two walked into that store. As we worked together, rinsing dishes and stacking them into her dishwasher, I began to open up about what had happened. It started in vague outlines, some family tension, but before long I found myself recounting more of the truth. The toxic favoritism, the financial drain, the betrayal. Sophie didn't interrupt. She didn't offer trite advice or try to fix it. She just listened. Sometimes that's all we really need. Family dynamics can be so complicated, she said finally, but sometimes distance is the healthiest option. I nodded slowly. I'm starting to realize that. By the time I carried Ethan, now deeply asleep, to the car, Sophie and I had exchanged numbers and agreed to set up a playdate with her nephew soon. Driving home, my emotions were tangled. I still felt the sting of what my family had done, but beneath that pain was something new, a sense of release, freedom. I'd been carrying so much for so long, their bills, their drama, their approval, without even realizing how heavy it had become. Back at our house, I tucked Ethan into bed, brushing his hair gently off his forehead. Then I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and a deep breath. First, I logged into the bank and transferred the remaining funds from the joint account I'd set up for my parents into my own private savings. Then I drafted an urgent request to my financial advisor for a meeting. Finally, I composed an email to my parents. Subject regarding today: Mom and Dad, today was deeply hurtful and disrespectful, not just to me, but to Ethan. I need some time to process what happened and what it means for our relationship going forward. Please do not contact me for a few days. I will reach out when I'm ready to talk. Regarding the $5,000 0 cents withdrawal, I expect a full explanation of how those funds were used. In the meantime, I've closed the joint account and will be reevaluating our financial arrangement going forward. Morgan. I read the email twice, took one more deep breath, and hit send before I could second guess myself. The next morning, I called my office and requested 2 personal days. I needed the time not just to rest, but to think clearly and plan. While Ethan built Lego castles at the kitchen table, I opened a fresh spreadsheet and began cataloging every dollar I'd given my parents over the years. Every mortgage payment, every utility bill, every unexpected emergency transfer. I added it all up. The total $153,742 0 cents. Then I created a second column. What had I received in return? Occasional babysitting, a few birthday cards, constant criticisms about how I raised my child. Seeing it laid out like that left no room for excuses. When my financial advisor called back, I was ready. I want to disentangle from them, I said, but not leave them destitute. We could implement a step-down plan, he suggested. Gradually reduce your financial support over 6 months. Give them time to adjust. That sounds fair, I agreed, but I want it documented. Formal agreements, no more blind trust. 3 days after Thanksgiving, I received a voicemail from Aunt Sarah. Her voice was tight with anger. Your Uncle Thomas told me what really happened, that your parents have been taking credit for all the help you've given Amanda, using your money and pretending it was theirs. At dinner, after you left, they told the entire family that they paid for Amanda's last rehab stay. I know for a fact that was your money, Morgan. This needs to stop. That call gave me all the confirmation I needed. It was time. I arranged for Ethan to spend the afternoon with Sophie's nephew and drove to my parents' house with a folder full of documentation beside me. I felt surprisingly calm, no rage, just resolve. This wasn't just for me, it was for Ethan. He deserved to grow up watching his mother enforce healthy boundaries, not crumble to guilt and obligation. I parked in their driveway and sat there for a few minutes, the weight of the folder beside me. Part of me considered just mailing it. But I knew I needed to say the words aloud for my own closure. Taking a final deep breath, I grabbed the folder and walked to the front door. Before I could knock, it opened. My mother stood there, a mixture of relief and nerves on her face. Morgan, thank goodness. We've been so worried. May I come in? I asked, my tone polite but distant. Of course. Of course, she said, stepping aside. Your father's in the living room. We thought you might come today. The house looked just as it had a few days earlier, but the holiday decorations now felt hollow. My father rose from his recliner as I entered. His expression was unreadable. Morgan, he said simply. Good to see you. Is Amanda here? No, my mother answered quickly. She's out. Good, I said. Before we talk about Thanksgiving, I'd like to address this. I placed the folder on the coffee table and opened it to the first page, a spreadsheet with my signature at the bottom. Is a full record of the financial support I've given you over the past 5 years. My parents exchanged glances, but didn't reach for the paper. We know you've helped a lot, my father said carefully, and we appreciate $153,742, I said flatly. That's the total, including the $5,000 0 cents you took without asking. My mother pressed a hand to her throat, visibly shaken. That can't be right. It's right, I said, pulling out supporting documents. Here are the bank statements, every mortgage payment, utility bills, medical costs, car repairs, rehab programs, 5 years of financial records. My father cleared his throat, preparing to respond, but I held up a hand. I'm not here to argue, I'm here to inform. Things are changing. You'll be receiving formal documentation outlining a 6-month reduction plan. After that, I will no longer provide financial support. If Amanda needs help, that is between you and her, not me. I have done my part. They said nothing, not in protest, not in apology, and that silence told me everything. For the first time in years, I felt completely in control. I stood up, calmly gathering the folder. Goodbye for now, I said. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. Then I walked out, leaving behind the weight I'd carried for far too long. Family helps family, my mother said quietly, as if it were some final defense. When I needed babysitting, I counted that too. I replied evenly, pulling out another page from my folder. Based on standard local rates, the amount of childcare you've provided would be valued at approximately $2,800, 0 cents. That leaves a balance of $150,942, 0 cents. We're not keeping score, my mother protested weakly. Apparently not, I said flatly, because if you were, you might have thought twice before humiliating me and your grandson in front of everyone on Thanksgiving. They both looked down, shame finally making its first appearance in their expressions. Amanda was in a state, my father mumbled. The doctor said stress could trigger another episode. What exactly is wrong with Amanda? I asked sharply. You've referenced episodes for years, but never once explained. The air thickened as they exchanged looks, and finally, my mother sighed. She's been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, she said. The doctors believe it explains the emotional instability, the mood swings, her issues with substance abuse, why she struggles with relationships. This was the first I'd heard of any formal diagnosis. I blinked, stunned. When did this happen? About a year ago, my father admitted. After that Christmas incident, I remembered the incident vividly. Amanda had shown up 3 hours late, reeking of alcohol, picked a fight with our mom, and stormed out. I hadn't known a diagnosis followed that. And you didn't tell me? I asked, disbelief cutting through my voice. Amanda didn't want anyone to know, my mother said softly. She was ashamed. So instead, I said, my voice rising, you let me believe she was just being difficult? You let me believe she was choosing to act that way? We were respecting her privacy, my father insisted. I shook my head, incredulous. Do you have any idea how that distorted everything? My view of her, my view of you? For years, I thought I was watching you enable selfish, manipulative behavior. And all the while, you kept this from me. We were trying to help her, my mother said defensively. By using my money behind my back? I snapped. By letting her believe you were the one supporting her? By letting her treat me like I'm the enemy? Before they could answer, the front door opened. Amanda walked in, her eyes locked on me immediately, narrowing into suspicion. What is she doing here? She asked coldly. Amanda, please, my mother said with a weary sigh. We're trying to talk. Amanda marched into the room, her gaze dropping to the papers spread across the table. What is all this? Financial records, I said evenly. A breakdown of the support I've been providing for this household for the past 5 years. Her eyes flickered wide for a moment before she rolled them and sneered. So, you're here to rub it in. Typical Morgan. always needing to prove she's better than everyone else? That's not why I'm here, I replied, keeping my tone calm. I'm here because I'm done being silent. What happened on Thanksgiving was not okay. Not for me, and definitely not for Ethan. Oh, boo-hoo, Amanda said mockingly. Perfect Morgan didn't get her perfect little holiday. But as I looked at her, really looked, I saw more than anger. Beneath the sarcasm and scorn, I caught a flicker of something else. Pain, fear, an aching need to feel important. Amanda, I said gently, I know about your diagnosis. She froze, then whipped her head toward our parents. You told her? After you promised? They didn't have to, I said softly. You've been telling me with your actions for years. I just didn't have the context to understand it. Don't psychoanalyze me, she snapped. You have no idea what I've been through. You're right, I said, nodding. I don't. Because no one in this family actually communicates honestly. I turned back to our parents. I'm not here to argue. I'm not even here to demand repayment. I'm here to inform you that our financial arrangement is over. My father sat up straighter, alert. What does that mean? It means, I said clearly, I will no longer be financially supporting this household as I have been. I've spoken with my financial advisor. We've created a 6-month transition plan. During that time, my contributions will decrease each month until they stop completely. You can't do that, my mother said, panic rising in her voice. Your father's health. My financial advisor will help you look into your options, I continued. A reverse mortgage, downsizing, retirement funds. There are plenty of alternatives that don't involve siphoning money from your daughter. This is because of one bad day? My father asked, voice incredulous. One misunderstanding, and you're just cutting us off? This isn't about Thanksgiving, I said. Thanksgiving was just the moment I saw everything clearly. This is about years of being taken for granted. Years of you accepting my help in silence while giving Amanda credit. Of prioritizing her needs over mine and over Ethan's. Amanda scoffed. So it is about money. You're just proving my point. I looked her square in the eye. Amanda, do you know who paid for your last rehab stay? She rolled her eyes. Mom and Dad, obviously. No, I said gently. I did. Just like I paid for the previous 3. Just like I paid for the therapy sessions you ghosted after 2 visits. Just like I've been paying the mortgage on the house you live in. Rent free. Her face faltered. Her eyes flicked to her parents, searching for a denial that didn't come. You let me believe, she started, then stopped. Yes, I said. They let you believe they were supporting you. Just like they let me believe you were simply difficult, not struggling. For a brief moment, the mask dropped. Amanda looked genuinely hurt. But then the wall came back up. So what, now I'm supposed to bow at your feet? Thank you for being the family's savior? No, I said quietly. I want honesty. I want respect. For me. And for Ethan. I stood, gathering my papers and placing them back in the folder. The transition plan begins next month, I said. I'll email the details. And with that, I left. For the first time in years, I walked out of that house with my head held high, and not a single part of me looked back. My financial advisor will be contacting you this week, I said, placing the final papers on the table. He'll walk you through the transition plan and help identify realistic options moving forward. My mother stood up, tears already welling in her eyes. Morgan, please. We can't manage without your help. You can, I said gently but firmly. You're both intelligent, capable adults with resources and options. You've become dependent on my support, but that doesn't mean you need it. You'll adjust. My father's face, which had cycled through denial and confusion, now twisted into anger. So that's it? After everything we've done for you, you're just walking away? The irony of that statement stung. And I almost laughed, not from humor, but from disbelief. "I'm not walking away from this family," I replied. "I'm setting the boundaries that should have been there a long time ago." I turned to go, but Amanda stepped into my path, blocking the door. "You think you're so perfect, don't you?" she hissed. "With your big house, your golden child, your perfect job. Some of us have real problems, Morgan." I looked her in the eye, seeing past the anger to something raw, something unspoken. "I know you're hurting, Amanda. I truly do. And I'm sorry you've had to struggle," I said gently. But pain doesn't justify hurting other people, especially not a 6-year-old who adores his grandparents and was heartbroken when they chose you over him. For a flicker of a moment, something like remorse passed across Amanda's face. She didn't reply. "I hope you get the help you need," I continued. "I really do. And I hope one day we can have a relationship based on mutual respect, not resentment. But until then, I need to protect myself and my son." I reached for the door. My mother followed, her tears now freely falling. "What about Christmas?" she pleaded. "What about Ethan's pageant?" I paused at the doorway. "Ethan and I are starting our own traditions this year. As for the pageant, you're welcome to attend. As grandparents who respect his mother." 3 days passed before I heard from Amanda. Her email was long, scattered, defensive, but buried within it was a small olive branch, an acknowledgement that her behavior at Thanksgiving had been wrong, and a note about working with a new therapist. It wasn't a full apology, but it was a start. A week later, my parents called and asked if Ethan and I would come to dinner, just the four of us. I declined, but I suggested meeting at a restaurant instead, someplace neutral. That dinner was tense. My father grumbled about cutting expenses. My mother pried into my life with uncomfortable questions, but both made an effort with Ethan, and that to me mattered more than anything. December unfolded with cautious boundaries. I didn't allow my parents to come to our home for Christmas, but I permitted a brief visit on Christmas Eve so they could exchange gifts with Ethan. At Ethan's school pageant, I greeted them politely and kept my distance. Little by little, I was building something new, a version of our family where respect came before obligation. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't always graceful, but it was honest. Then came the biggest surprise of all. Amanda sent Ethan a handmade card. Inside, in uneven handwriting, she'd written, "I'm sorry I was mean on Turkey Day. I hope I can be a better aunt. Love, Amanda." It was small, but real, and it gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. A month after the Thanksgiving fallout, Ethan and I had carved out a new rhythm. Our mornings were light, our weekends full of adventure. We'd started Saturday Explorers, our personal tradition of discovering new corners of the city, museums, parks, old bookstores. One crisp morning, as I packed his lunch, Ethan asked, "Can we go to the Holiday Light Festival this weekend?" "Absolutely," I said, "and maybe we can invite Sophie and her nephew Tyler, too." His eyes lit up. "Yes, Tyler's never been." My friendship with Sophie had become a quiet gift in my life. What started as an accidental meeting in a grocery store had grown into something meaningful, a grounded, uncomplicated bond. During a recent coffee date, I'd apologized for venting too much about my family, and she'd smiled and said, "Morgan, you've got to stop apologizing for taking up space. Real relationships aren't transactions." Her words stuck with me. For so long, I'd measured my worth in usefulness. The fixer, the provider, the responsible one. Without those roles, I wasn't sure who I was, but slowly I was beginning to find out. The week after Thanksgiving, I'd finally started therapy, something I'd long postponed. Dr. Levine was helping me unravel years of tangled emotions and misguided loyalty. "You didn't cause your sister's illness," she reminded me gently. "And you can't cure it. Same with your parents' finances. Their dependence isn't your responsibility. Letting go of that guilt was a daily practice. Some days were harder than others. The first reduction in financial support had triggered predictable panic. My parents called, texted, begged. I didn't give in. I redirected them to the financial advisor who was guiding them towards stability without me as the crutch. We might have to sell the house, my father had said, clearly bitter. Downsizing could be the best thing, I'd replied, keeping my tone neutral. I didn't offer solutions. I didn't offer exceptions. That chapter was closed. Ethan, always resilient, adjusted to our new reality with ease. He still asked about Grandma and Grandpa, and we kept our visits brief, structured, and emotionally safe. Amanda hadn't been present at any of those visits. According to my mother, she was working on things. I hope that was true for her sake, for Ethan's, for mine. But for now, our little world, our chosen traditions, our Saturday adventures, our growing circle of healthy relationships was enough. I was no longer the fixer, the rescuer, or the wallet. I was simply Morgan, a woman reclaiming her peace. And most importantly, a mother building a better future, not just for her son, but for herself. Amanda had begun committing herself seriously to her treatment, attending therapy sessions twice a week and enrolling in a structured outpatient program. It was the most consistent effort I'd ever seen from her. Over the following weeks, she sent me a handful of messages. Some contained what felt like sincere attempts at apology. Others carried a familiar edge of passive aggression. I chose to respond only to the former, offering brief encouragement. The rest, I ignored. As Christmas approached, my parents' invitations became more frequent and urgent. It's tradition, my mother insisted during one call. Ethan should be with family for Christmas. We are with family, I said calmly. We're just creating our own traditions now. I must have repeated that phrase a dozen times in the days leading up to the holiday. But still, I offered a gesture of goodwill. You're welcome to join us for a Christmas Eve dinner, if you'd like. To my surprise, they accepted. And even more surprisingly, they showed up on time, brought thoughtful gifts for Ethan, and for once, left the criticism at home. The evening wasn't perfect. My father made a few pointed remarks about their tighter budget, but it was peaceful. When they left, my mother gave me a tentative hug. Thank you for including us, she whispered. And for the first time in a long while, it sounded genuine. Later that night, after Ethan had finally fallen asleep, giddy from the excitement and sugar of Christmas Eve, I sat beside our small tree, quietly reflecting. The pain of Thanksgiving still lingered. It hadn't vanished, but it had changed shape. It had become the start of something new, a catalyst, a wake-up call I hadn't known I needed. Christmas Day was everything I hadn't known to hope for. Our home was full, not just with people, but with laughter, warmth, and sincerity. Sophie and her nephew Tyler joined us, along with Rachel and her husband, and two coworkers and their children. We shared food, exchanged small gifts, and talked about things that mattered. This is the best Christmas ever, Ethan declared with certainty as he played in a corner with the other kids. I looked around the room at the people who had shown up, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. I couldn't have agreed more. In one of my therapy sessions with Dr. Levine, she asked what I'd learned from Thanksgiving. My initial answers had been sharp. Don't trust anyone. Everyone's selfish in the end. But in time, softer truths began to surface. I learned that boundaries aren't a betrayal. They're a form of self-respect. I discovered that my value doesn't come from how much I give or how much I endure. I realized that family, real family, is defined not by obligation, but by love, by respect, and by choice. And most importantly, I saw that breaking harmful cycles is hard. It hurts, but it leads to peace that is worth every tear, every confrontation, every growing pain. In early January, Amanda sent another email. She was leaving for Colorado to enter a long-term treatment program for BPD. I need a fresh start, she wrote, away from all the dynamics here. Maybe someday we can have a real relationship as sisters, but I need to work on myself first. It was probably the most honest thing she had ever written to me. I replied simply, I wish you healing and peace. I hope we get that chance someday. And I meant it. My parents, too, were changing slowly. They had listed their house and begun looking at smaller, more manageable condos in a nearby retirement community. It was a choice they probably should have made long ago, but at least they were finally making it. Our relationship remained cautious, tentative, but more balanced than before. One quiet evening, as Ethan and I were cooking dinner together, he looked up from his stool and asked a question that caught me off guard. Mom, are we still a family, even though it's just us? I put down the spoon I was stirring and knelt beside him. Absolutely, sweetheart, I said, meeting his eyes. Families come in all shapes and sizes. Sometimes it's a mom and dad and kids. Sometimes it's two moms or two dads. Sometimes it's grandparents. And sometimes it's a mom and her amazing little boy. He smiled, thinking it over. So we're still a family, just me and you. Yes, I said, pulling him into a hug. And don't forget, we've got Sophie and Tyler and Rachel and all the people who love us. That's our chosen family. His quiet nod, full of understanding, far beyond his years, reminded me what this entire journey had really been about. We weren't just surviving, we were healing, growing, becoming. Thanksgiving had broken something open, not just in my family, but in me. And from that break had come space to breathe, to grow new roots. The boundaries I'd set had cost me something, but they had given me back far more: peace, clarity, a deeper bond with my son, and the belief, finally, that I could define family on my own terms. The journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more conversations, more work to keep the boundaries in place. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. Sometimes the most powerful gratitude doesn't come from what we give, it comes from what we finally allow ourselves to receive: respect, space, and the quiet joy of being truly seen. And maybe someday, if my parents and sister truly learn what those words mean, we'll build something new, not from guilt, not from need, but from love. Until then, Ethan and I would keep building our life, one boundary, one tradition, one quiet act of self-respect at a time. If you've ever had to set difficult boundaries with your family, I see you. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. And if any part of my journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to know it's okay to put yourself first. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for them and for you is to say, this stops here.